Howdy, everybody. I'm back. It's another edition of The Rise and Fall of the Federal Government. And today, what I want to talk about is what we call the Gilded Age, along with the Roaring Twenties and today. In other words, 1870 to 1900, that was what many people, historians, call the Gilded Age. I'm pretty sure everybody's heard of the Roaring Twenties. That was from 1920 to 1929. And then today, 2025, kind of in my continuing series of what was then, what is now, and the similarities between those time periods. Now, one thing to remember about the Gilded Age and the 1920s, Roaring Twenties, is both of those periods ended in economic disaster for the United States, massive depressions, recessions. It depends on how you look at things, I guess. But everybody has heard, I'm sure almost everybody has heard of the Great Depression that took place, the stock market crash in 1929. And the Gilded Age had 1893, a massive depression. I talked about economics in the last show, talked about President McKinley and all the corruption that went forward to them. And I'm only going to talk about three areas today because there's three parts to each of these areas. And the first one I'm going to talk about is economic boom and inequality. The Gilded Age especially was rapid industrial growth, wealthy elite people, a group we called the robber barons, and they were John Rockefeller, Standard Oil, Andrew Carnegie, Carnegie Steel, J.P. Morgan, banking, finance, Cornelius Vanderbilt, railroads, Jay Gould, railroads, James J. Hill, railroads, and Leland Stanford, railroads. Now, all of these men, all of them were what we call robber barons. They were what we would call now oligarchs, monopolists. They controlled entire industries themselves. Okay, this was in the Gilded Age. It was rapid industrial growth, a very small group of wealthy elite people. Now, the 1920s saw even more rapid economic growth. It was actually the time of what we call the laissez-faire, hands-off of the economy. The government wanted nothing to do with it. Business was allowed to do whatever they wanted to do. And we had a lot of economic inequality. And we also saw the rise of organized crime. Al Capone in Chicago, Johnny Torrio in Chicago, Luciano in New York. Arnold Rothstein, the brain, New York. He's the one who fixed the 1919 World Series between the White Sox and now known as the Black Sox scandal. Frank Costello, New York, Bugs Moran, Meyer, Lansky, Dutch Schultz, all of those people came to power in the 1920s. Why? Because loose rules, pretty much a do what you want to do kind of society. Now, in 1925, we're seeing more of, or 2025 rather, we're seeing more of this economic inequality. We have what we call the tech and pharma bros and large-scale corruption. I mean, we could consider them the new robber barons. These are the guys, mostly males, who run the high-tech companies, the Googles, the X or Twitter, however you want to call it, PayPal, all these guys, Microsoft, all of these guys became very rich, very powerful. Look at our current Washington. Look at who's leading Washington, who's in charge of Washington. They're all what we would have called the robber barons of those days. Massive income, economic inequality. Also, there's a new group called private equity. These are businesses that the Supreme Court has said, well, they're really kind of like humans, so they have all the economic power and they have all the voting rights that any normal human being has. And they will spend billions to buy companies, gut them, and then sell the assets to make a quick profit because it's all about profit. It's not about long-term stability. It's not about doing anything for the workers. It's all about long-term profit. And all three of those periods were pretty much guided by the same thing. Wealthy elites, rise of people getting what they wanted because they had money. And remember, I've always said in America, money equals power. If you got money, you got power. If you don't have money, you have no power, or you have very limited power. Okay, so that's the first area I want to talk about was economic boom and inequality. Now, the next area is political corruption and business equality, or business influence, I guess you would say, more than anything. Because what happened is in the 20s, okay, you have political machines, or in the Gilded Age, rather, I'm sorry, you had what we call the the growth of the political machine. In Chicago, the mayor's office, in New York, they had these powerful political machines that got everything they wanted simply by buying votes. Okay, and they were known for in the Gilded Age for monopolies. Rockefeller, I've talked about those, Standard Oil, all of those things were a result of hands off government letting the rich and powerful do what they want because everybody thought, well, they've got to know what they're doing. After all, they're rich. Okay, now the 1920s also had business friendly policies. Again, laissez faire. Do what you want to do. They also had scandals like the Teapot Dome scandal, which was, again, a corruption, just like the McKinley administration. You can buy and sell power in Washington if you have enough money. Okay, and that's what it's all about. As long as you have money throughout history, that's just the way it's been in America. And people need to understand it. That is the way it has been. Will it always be? I don't know, but that's the way it has been. 2025, what are we expecting? Tax cuts for higher earners, okay? Government subsidies for private industries. Now, this is done in the form of tax abatements. So, example is a major company will come into a city, such as any Texas city, okay, such as Austin, and instead of having to pay property taxes and all the normal taxes, the government, the county government or the state government will offer them tax abatements. They'll say you don't have to pay any taxes for 10 years. Okay, in return, you're going to put your factory here. You're going to give us so many thousands of jobs. Quite often it doesn't work out that way because if it did, they wouldn't have to keep raising taxes on property for homeowners and things like that. Okay, so there is this government subsidies to major corporations who really don't need them because they're, after all, major corporations with billions of dollars, okay? Now they're also talking about opening up federal land in order to harvest lumber and pump more oil. Now, one thing about oil, and I hear this all the time from people, and I'm from Texas, okay? I'm in Texas. The United States is a net exporter of oil. We sell more oil to foreign countries than we import. We don't import a lot of oil. We have enough oil in this country right now to handle everything we need. But what happens is, well, people go, oh, well, no, we need more because we'll lower. No, we don't lower prices. The more oil we pump, the higher prices. And for proof of that, just look at the corporate earnings of all these companies. They are not losing any money. They're not tightening their belts, okay? It's just the way it is in America at this time. Now, the third area that I want to talk about is cultural shifts and social unrest. In the Gilded Age, we had labor strikes, immigration debates, issues, gee, what a surprise that is, and racial tensions. Well, wait a minute, we're doing that now too, okay? And the Gilded Age, remember, was in the 1870s to 1890s, okay? The 1920s added another type of cultural rebellion. People actually, I guess you would say, wanted to reject a lot of the older days when we had so many book bans, although we still had them. But it was a cultural rebellion. We had flappers, we had jazz. And because the government insisted on prohibition, saying you couldn't drink, we had speakeasies, which gave rise to the organized crime that I talked about earlier. Okay, the government seems to make more problems than they ever solve. And they did in the 1920s, and as a result, 1929, the Great Depression. In 2025, what are we seeing? We're seeing book bans, culture wars, immigration issues, more race problems, and the rise of Christian nationalism, where people are saying, do as I say, not as I do. And everybody has to follow the way we want them to think. We're seeing those same kinds of cultural shifts. We're seeing the same kinds of problems that we've had in the past. So in essence, what we're doing is what we're seeing, in my opinion anyway, and it's only my opinion, is we are seeing a return to the days of the Gilded Age, the Roaring '20s, and today. All three have the same kind of problems. We have labor issues, immigration, racial problems, economic inequality. In other words, in 100 and something years, almost two, we haven't learned diddly. We just keep doing the same things we're always doing. Now, in future episode, I do want to talk about, I did this one today because somebody asked me to talk about the Gilded Age, and I enjoy it because I love showing the similarities between then and now, proving once again Americans really don't learn from history. And next issue, I think I'm going to talk about the Department of Education, why it's here, what started everything, why is everybody so mad at it? Well, not everybody. Actually, very few are really mad at it, but it makes great headlines, great emotional things. So we'll talk about that. Thank you for joining me. I'm Hank Wilson. Follow along if you don't mind on this account. I appreciate it. And this is the rise and fall of the federal government. I'll talk to you again next time. Have a great one, folks. Bye-bye. Oh, and by the way, peace, y'all.